Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Wendy McEwen. I'm the Head of Marketing and Digital at Knight Frank in Asia Pacific, and I'm also the co-chair of the BritCham Built Environment Committee. The BritCham Built Environment Committee encompasses real estate, architecture, facilities management, and all other relevant business functions. Our aim as a committee is to promote the built environment sector and to provide opportunities for members to network and to develop industry education and identification of best practice by interacting together. Today's event is all about shaping the hybrid work future. Over the past 12 months, there has been much debate about the future of work and about where we will work. In today's event, we will hear how workplace and HR experts from Amazon Web Services, Netflix, GSK, and IWG are approaching this in their sector across the region. Thank you to all of our speakers today for making the time to share your experiences. The session today will be moderated by my colleague, Samarth Kasturia, who is the Director of Workplace and Strategic Consulting for Knight Frank Asia Pacific. Samarth is passionate about transformation and culture and helping shape the positive role our workplace and organisational policies can play in our workplaces. He's a trained architect with a master's degree in finance and investment, specialising in workplace and real estate strategy development. In his role, Samarth supports corporate real estate leaders to optimise and transform their work and their workplaces. So I'll now hand over to Samarth, who will moderate today's session and kick off.
Thanks, Wendy. Hello all, and again, big thanks to BritCham and all the speakers for making time to join us this morning. I'll start with a quick introduction across the table. So we'll start with Arnald, but before we do, want to keep it in a lighter vein, and considering we've got some really awesome brands on this in this conversation, we'll start with an introduction to what yourselves, but also what you're watching on Netflix or what you're binging on Netflix at this time. So we'll start with Arnald on that.
Right, thank you so much. I seldomly watch, to be honest, but I have been watching it with my daughter sometimes from time to time, spending like 10 minutes, 15 minutes a day with her, and there is a lot of animes that she has been watching. Oh, wow. And every time I join her room, and it's a different set of animes. So don't ask me what's the name of it. I cannot understand or remember, but I think that was a fun experience.
Awesome. Now a little bit about yourself as we go.
Right. Yeah, so I work for GSK. I joined the company about 7 months ago and currently responsible for all the capital projects delivery and the performance of the departments. And so before that, I spent about 11 years in the banking industry as well, also running corporate real estate. Thank you.
Thanks. Over to the master of Netflix, Phil.
Yes, good morning. Currently watching our summer blockbuster movie, Army of the Dead, which it says very much what it does on the box. Essentially, it's Las Vegas and lots of zombies, so there's no love lost there. Personally, so I've been with Netflix for a few years now, part of a global team that essentially finds, builds and runs infrastructure for Netflix for us to continue to bring great product.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. Over to Darren.
Hi, so I've just finished watching Jupiter's Legacy on Netflix, and that's next up for me. So I've been with IWG now for just under 10 years, working in the flex sector, both in the UK market, spent a bit of time in China, and I've been covering and managing the Singapore market for the last couple of years now.
Awesome. Thanks, Darren. And over to Anela. Anela, you can choose to answer what you ordered from Amazon last, but we'll.
No, I won't. No, I'm watching The Sons of Sam, which oh, wow. I'm a glutton for murder mystery type things. So anything that comes out that looks like that, I watch and I binge on it.
Excellent. Thank you all. My own binge isn't as diverse, but I'm watching New Amsterdam with my family. So that's a really nice medical drama. So Netflix is keeping us all sane as the heightened restrictions obviously help us rethink what we're going to do with the office. So that launches us into today's topic. The topic is a fairly interesting one, but at the same time, it's interesting because of the people on this panel. So in terms of what we are looking to discuss today, we want to discuss three main buckets of what COVID-19 and flexibility and all that's transpired in the last year and a half has done for us. So we're going to discuss what it did to our place or our place of work or our workplace, as they say. Then the second theme is around productivity and how does that get connected to hybrid working or going back between home, third spaces, and the branded office as such. And lastly, there is how does that impact our company culture, right? What are we doing to sort that out? So that's the broad theme, and it's a very informal discussion. So we'll go through the panelists in the order that they're showing up on my screen, but we'll encourage cross discussion as much as possible. So starting off with Phil. Phil, in terms of occupancy or place, we know that Netflix is a very flexible organization, even pre any change happened in 2020. What has this done to your regional portfolios or your Singapore portfolio of workplaces?
So essentially, Netflix's culture, even leading into this time, was extremely flexible. Essentially, we lent into the culture where the freedom, responsibility, and essentially you could work from anywhere before we came into this. So the impact to our staff on a day-to-day basis was quite minimal. I think the only thing that was really missing was that physical interaction with people, which we're all kind of seeing at the moment. That's something that as we kind of start to come out of this, we're very interested to see what the trends are going to be moving forward, to see how people come back and interact with the space. But in relation to kind of how we're tracking and how we're using the space, nothing's physically changed in relation to the infrastructure that we have in place. The only thing is, as we have across the whole region, clear understanding of social distancing, clear adherence to what's going on in relation to government regulations, and essentially being extremely mindful that people are going through, a very special time, in their careers, but also, for all of us general, both personally as well as professionally.
Indeed. Yeah, that makes sense that it shows a perspective of how flexibility from a long term has kind of endured unexpected changes. So thanks for that, Phil. We'll quickly move over to Arnold for a different perspective.
We are not as flexible, so however, we are taking this. The COVID is really accelerating things, but I think in GSK, we have these smart work guidelines 4.0 recently. So you can tell by the name, it is already the 4th generation of smart working. And then we introducing a relatively aggressive ratios. And we believe that in the future, even when we back to BAU mode, we're assuming that 50% of the staff will be still working from home. So it's only 50% in the workplace. So work from home, co-working space is definitely a long-term strategies in the real estate portfolio for the company.
Arnold, that's very interesting. So one of the topics that has been quite much debated is this change enduring. So GSK's commitment to enduring change or introducing flexible spaces into the mix of the portfolio is quite interesting. And you're saying 50% of GSK's staff would be in flexibility, whether it's a different kind of space or remote or from the office. So interesting and slightly different perspective from Netflix. So thanks for that, Arnold. We'll seek the occupier perspective, but also the HR perspective on what space is doing from Anela on AWS. Anela, your thoughts, please.
Okay, sure. So we have obviously, just like Phil and Arnald said, we definitely are ensuring that we follow all the country regulations and when shutdowns happen, what's the social distancing requirements. However, our overall philosophy is that we want to ensure that our culture remains intact and that we're continuing to develop and build for our customers. So our overall philosophy is that we are creating what we call hybrid work geographies, which means that we want our employees to be able to land in the office whenever they feel like it's appropriate, and that we want them to be within a commuting distance from the office so that they can come in and work together with other builders and other employees. This means that we do have seats for our employees, and we're going to continue that. We had that before. We're going to continue that after. And again, they still have the flexibility to work within the hours that they want to work, the locations they want to work, and there is some flexibility still to do that. But we believe that being together in the office is important for innovation, for collaboration, for mental health, for all the reasons that it's important to have, face-to-face time with our employees. So we do allow the same level of flexibility, but we also allow our employees to come to the office and they have a seat at the office.
That's amazing. So 3 different degrees of change. And Darren, as an industry expert in flexible spaces, what are your thoughts? What are you seeing? Which bucket do you think people are more leaning towards, if I may say that?
Yeah, so I think there's a variation. We've seen that already from the other panelists here today. And it'd be easy for us to assume that the shift in the way that people are working from a shared physical environment to a home environment, wherever is most convenient and productive for them, has been entirely driven by COVID. But the reality is the pandemic has certainly been a dramatic one. And it's had a permanent lasting effect, I think, in the way that people look at their workplace strategies and their hybrid solutions. But for us as an occupier and in the field of flexible working, we certainly feel that what it's done is it's accelerated some of the trends and the sort of thought processes that have been in place for a period of time in the way that people have shifted their workspace. And we're seeing that heightened desire for organizations at the moment to really review and readdress their workplace strategies, whether that's more of a shift to a home hybrid working environment, as we're seeing enforced at times across the world, or if we're looking at readdressing how we utilize our workspace presently in a more agile way.
Indeed, I completely agree with you. And this is considering this is a interactive panel, just a quick prompt to Sabina. We've got some nice quick questions for the audience and the panelists to discuss. So they kind of are on each theme we're going to discuss, which is place, productivity, and culture. But back to Darren, that's a very interesting point, and what Phil, Arnold, and Anela mentioned. We ran a survey at Knight Frank for 400 odd occupiers, and one of the things that came out of that was the comparison of this change or acceleration, right? So there's a global level of expected change, and there's an APAC level of expected change. APAC is slightly lower in terms of change, so they're not looking to change as much as perhaps some other locations are. So very interesting to see the mix of different aspects of change, but quite good. So Sabina, is that question coming up? It'll be interesting. Yep, here we are. So please do participate, please do vote. It's a simple 3-choice question around what we just discussed. What would you like your space to be? And we'll quickly discuss that answer with the panelists as well. Meanwhile, Darren, are you seeing any specific modulation of flexibility that occupiers are looking at? Of course, with heightened restrictions, that's a different timing, but perhaps the last month in Singapore, what were your observations of larger occupiers doing enterprise overflow or smaller startups?
What we're sort of seeing is we were seeing the nature of sort of flex environment really targeting around SMEs and small startups historically, with a mix of larger enterprise users within that space, but that was a small proportion of the overall users. We're now seeing a larger take up and inquiry level from large users across our network. And those users are looking for agility around the locations that they can provide, both from a physical fixed office location and also the drop-in locations that are closer to the users' homes, to add that flexibility and ability to remote their teams without having to put in a large infrastructure cost. So there's a lot of those sort of conversations across Singapore and across the region happening.
Makes sense, and I think that's it's going to be a moving feast as we understand over the next short while until this all kind of settles in. As Phillip said, they're observing what trends come out. So a quick trend from our audience here. 88% want their workplace to be a hub of gatherings with the colleagues for over, that could be visited multiple times a week, but not as it were. But seemingly there are some participants who do want it to be as it were before the pandemic. No one, thankfully, wants it to completely disappear. So the workplace indeed isn't dead, which is a heartening sign, but also a good sign, as Anela mentioned, on well-being and productivity and mental health, which is an interesting lead in to our next theme, which is productivity. Now, I'll say this from personal experience. We've gone back and forth between working from home and 3 days a week or 5 days a week, and then suddenly work from home. With this being a bit turbulent and not consistent, discussing understanding the pandemic, my productivity obviously has had to catch up with being in the space and not being in office space. So what has your organization done to enable that kind of ECG of working from home and not working from home? But also, has that had an impact on the technology you use? Of course, initially, a lot of switch in using VCs versus in-person meetings. But what is an enduring change on HR technology applications in your organizations that we can all learn from? We'll start with Arnald on this one.
Right, thank you, Samarth. I think from the pool questions that we just had is very similar to what our own survey result within the organizations. So we run Leesman survey, the work from home module for our major markets, and also we run standalone country-based that work from home survey, just trying to understand what the employees are looking for. And over 90% of the staff were saying that they still prefer post-COVID, spending 2 to 3 times a day working from home. And Thailand, for example, is an interesting market. It's a traditional market for us. The GM initially believed that employee wants to come to the office because of small homes, poor connectivity, etc. And then after he saw the survey result, he was a bit surprised. But at the end, he was saying that if this is what our people want, then we should be giving it to them. So I think that's a very good example and case study for us. In terms of workplace technology, we have, for new officers, of course, we have occupancy sensor, we have desk booking systems and apps, and we try to implement IoT where's possible. And for home working, we support our employee by giving them some subsidies, reimbursements, work setting, setup, and to help them to be more productive at home.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I think a lot of good companies have done that for their colleagues, whether providing a subsidy on prices of the hardware they have to purchase, or providing some kind of benefit on internet payment. So that's really interesting, Arnold. And I'll come back to that leadership change and per square foot piece. That's very dear to my heart towards the end of this. But over to Phil. What has changed?
Aside from there being nobody in the office?
Indeed.
Basically, I mean, as I linked in earlier, was essentially the culture for Netflix already kind of lent us into being able to be productive wherever we are. And I can't talk to overall Netflix's productivity, but I know for my team, the leaning in on what's happening in relation to the pandemic, as well as still delivering projects during this time remotely. Productivity, I wouldn't say has gone down. It's just become a little bit more active, and you have to basically embrace the technologies and your relationships, with the people you're working with and in the market to continue to be successful. So it's essentially it's technology is a piece of that, but essentially it has to work arm in arm with you being able to, leverage your resources to be able to be successful and to keep moving during these times.
Indeed. And is there any support that Netflix has offered differently? Like you said, they're already quite flexible pre-pandemic, but has this, with the restricted travel as well, of course, as is expected, has that done any difference to any technology that you've provided to your colleagues and staff?
Technology hasn't changed significantly. It's definitely the trends that we're seeing is a change of how people interact on VC. Everybody's trying to make that a little bit of a better experience than it is today. making that a little bit more interactive, making that more diverse and inclusive, and ensuring that everybody gets an equal voice is always going to be a challenge, and one that we're going to continue to lean in on to try and make that a better experience for us working remotely. But also when we get back to whatever it is that it's going to be, it'll be part of a meeting room normal, which we're looking forward to seeing.
Indeed, and this was a very, very good LinkedIn discussion I had with a bunch of workplace strategists, and it was around hybrid meetings, right? Being cognizant of behaviors during this. And while some countries were returning a couple of days back, there were still rostering and restrictions on how many of what percentage of occupancy at the time was allowed in different countries. So making it a standard to include, let's say, a Teams link or a Zoom link into your meeting invite, and for people to choose spaces even physically to meet with a screen available, small steps are definitely in a hybrid space setup are quite helpful. So thanks for that, Phil. Over to Darren on this one. What are you seeing in terms of technology that IWG has offered to its occupants?
Yeah, so technology has been a massive driver for us as an organisation over the last couple of years, but really heightened in terms of how we give full access and integration to our users through our applications. And beyond that, in terms of how we interact in the customer journeys and experience of a client. The days of just taking a physical tour in a physical office, I think are really gone. And what we've integrated into our solutions is a end-to-end customer journey where our teams can do a Teams meeting with customers. They can take them through the design, planning, 3D modeling now of a space. And across most of our global network, in Singapore particularly, we've launched out our own design your own office features where customers can pick and choose their furniture options from a suite of options, because we know customers want to change the way they're working. They still want physical space. We've seen that from the poll that's just come out, but they want to use it in a different way. And so we've adapted our offering to ensure that customers can choose to work in the way that they wish to work, and have the social distancing element, as well as the design specifications to their particular brand and their office as well. And that's been quite a big change in terms of people change, mindset change, and integration of technology into the flow.
That makes sense, and I think it's a really good step for even the people who are interested in looking at IWG spaces to be able to do so safely and remotely as things change. So that's a really cool step. Thanks for that. Over to Anela. Productivity, Anela. How's that being supported?
So first of all, like Phil, we didn't really see a drop in productivity. In fact, I would say our people are working more hours than they've ever been in the past, because now you don't have commute times, you don't have, water cooler chit chats, and you don't get to go to lunch with your team. So I find that they're actually working way more hours than they would normally work if they were in an office. So I don't think we've seen necessarily a drop in productivity. I'll plus one all the stuff that's already been called out. I think one of the things that we found that makes our employees and our builders much more productive is the ability to, especially new hires, the ability to onboard properly. And it's very difficult to onboard in Amazon's peculiar culture when you're doing it online versus being together, because as you know, culture is imbibed and absorbed and experienced, right? And so trying to explain all that in videos or in Zoom calls, or we use chimes, the chime calls, makes it very difficult to actually have the right onboarding experience for employees as they come in, but then also just the touch points to ensure that that the culture remains intact, because that's really important to Amazon. Is the culture stays strong and intact, and it's been one of our durable competitive advantages as an organization. So I think from that perspective, it's been very, very interesting. The other piece is, we had to quickly pivot from, we used to do on-site interviews, and we have this process called the loop, which we put an interviewer through multiple managers and leaders to interview, and we used to bring them on site to the office, and so we had to quickly pivot to doing that virtually. And it's very, it's always better to have face-to-face interviews so you can get a sense of the individual, but we've had to do that virtually, and it still works, but you kind of miss that experience of actually having a face-to-face meeting with a candidate. And so I would say while it's working, we still think that actually meeting someone face-to-face. The one thing that's really worked from a productivity perspective, especially here in the region where we're so far away, is we actually are getting more of our executives to meet our customers. So in the past, it was very hard to get Andy Jassy's time to go meet customers because he had, it's flying, right? So you fly one place, you meet a couple of customers, and you fly back, and that's a whole week, right? So, but now it's been really good to get all our executives in Seattle into executive meetings much faster and much more effectively. So Andy can meet our customers in Korea and in Japan and China much faster than in the past. We're able to schedule that. So I think that's been a better use of our executives' time. It's been a big productive way to get our Seattle and our global executives to meet our customers here in the region.
I agree, and they're two really fantastic points, Anela. And as Sabina puts up the next question for the audience, I'll run this past Phil and Arnold. Phil, I remember we had at some point discussed the onboarding experience as you moved locations, but that was pre-pandemic. How's Netflix looking at onboarding or initial times for newer employees in this virtual world?
So essentially, my onboarding experience with Netflix, thankfully, was done outside of this time and was predominantly virtual. I'm part of a global team, so essentially I didn't see anybody until kind of week 2, week 3, week 4. When this first started off, my team went out and started doing videos of all of the locations. So our Japan office, our Korea office, our Singapore office, and India. And they did a virtual tour of the office. So from a workplace perspective, that onboarding experience was, we're going to show you the environment that you can't necessarily go to today, but we're going to highlight all the highlights and the best parts, as well as that standard tour that you do with a person on their day one. We made that virtual, and we gave everybody an opportunity to see what it is that we did, and that became a bit of a trend, and essentially was picked up globally during the pandemic as people had an opportunity to kind of go in, make these videos, and then essentially as that onboarding process happens. So as you can imagine right now, our onboarding process is extremely virtual. The other thing is with Netflix is they partner you with an onboarding buddy, and that person is essentially there to ensure that you have a very seamless and easy transition into the workplace. And in some cases, they don't necessarily need to be your manager or somebody that you report to or so on. It's just somebody that's going to give you the insight of the Netflix culture, where it is you're working, who it is you're working with, and how that works. So you spend a fair amount of time sitting with these people and just chatting through, Netflix's culture is very unique, and essentially getting your head around how that works, especially in the first few weeks of you onboarding, is very important. And one of those things that all companies should do is just give everybody the opportunity to understand the culture as they come into an organization. And that's what we essentially lean in on.
Indeed. And it's really interesting on how that's, how an existing piece of process has transformed or has been of use in a pandemic situation. But Arnold, you actually transitioned during the pandemic, as you said, 7 months in. So how was your experience?
Yes, I can talk about my own onboarding experience, right, with the company. It was, GSK has a very structured onboarding. So again, they would tell you day one, what do you do after first week, after first month, after 3 months, etc. So it's a very structured onboarding journey. But lacking the face-to-face and lacking with the team dynamics in the office is actually quite hard. So I admitted that it's actually take longer for me to settle into the team and into the organizations. But the lucky thing is I got a very good buddy. As Phil mentions, that the person that not as a peer, that person is actually feeding a lot of informal informations to your day-to-day work, which makes the whole thing different. And yes, it would. The lucky thing is in Singapore, we were able to go back to the office for a few months. And during that time, and the team has also agreed that we spend 2 days in the office trying to do some connections, collaborations, which also helps to start knowing the colleagues as a person, because usually even during the video call we have meetings day to day, but it's not really the real persons that you're trying to understand. Yeah, thank you.
Indeed, Arnold, and I think that it's a oh wow, the poll results are out, but we'll get to it. Darren, I've been referring to you for market intel, but at this time, as a very large organization yourself, how is IWG taking on very different community management colleagues, management colleagues? How's that onboarding and transformation being dealt with in IWG?
Yeah, so from IWG's perspective and Singapore's perspective, we've been, I suppose, fortunate enough that we're operating throughout all positions in the market space, because we look after customers that have specific needs to be in the space. We've had to adapt and pivot how we would train and how we would develop our new team members. And part of that has gone to a global learning platform where we digitally engage with all our staff members. But I think the one thing that we've taken from this experience with the pandemic and the more remote teams and the lack of travel that we've maybe had as a senior level is putting a lot more time and effort and investment around the mental health and the well-being of our employees, and ensuring that you actually have those touch points and engagement points on a very regular basis, not just from a leadership team, but from a team-to-team, peer-to-peer level as well. Because that's the part that really we found was missing initially when you transition to a home working environment or a lockdown environment. And it's taken a lot of organizations, us included, a while to get maybe the right balance. And I think we've still got a lot of learning and journey to go along that way. But, I think for us, that's really the key takeaway.
Indeed, and I think the whole impact of onboarding and culture. We're working with a client across the region that we actually asked their employees, saying, well, we've got to take a decision in the middle of the time, which is quite unpredictable. And real estate decisions, as we would all understand, are not short-term decisions, at least a couple of years locked in, unless it's IWG, and then it's a very flexible situation. But we asked these people, a fair amount of colleagues across that organization, on productivity and engagement, which is quite similar to the question we just asked here. And surprisingly or unsurprisingly, the answer is quite similar. So in the poll we just ran, very interestingly, 30% are highly productive, highly engaged when they're working remotely, but 57 or nearly 60% are exactly what my survey with another organization gave, which is high productivity but low engagement. So there is much to be done to make sure that while people are more productive, as Anela said, and Phil already has been in that productive work from anywhere mode for a while, but there is much to be done to make sure that it doesn't take longer to do simple processes, and special attention from management to make sure engagement stays in. One of the examples that I have personally observed is making sure that there are certain types of spaces and activities that happen within the office, and even remote staff, enduring remote staff, are made to feel a part of that design process and made to feel a part of that ownership of those spaces. But that's just the space angle, right? There's tons more. So interesting result. But there was a last question. There were 14%, I believe, and I think the screen isn't showing the results anymore. But 14% were low productivity, low engagement. Thanks, Sabina. Which is where I think there is an interesting debate to be had on what functions they are and how can we help them first on priority, and then the highly productive ones which are feeling a bit disengaged. But overall, a fantastic segue into the last bucket, which is culture and engagement. Now, this is, I think, any senior leader we meet generally is talking about making sure staff are happy, their mental well-being is there. Of course, productivity goes up and down, and it's an external environment dependency, but the engagement is where we directly link it to retention and attraction of staff, which is the organization itself. So very, very simple question across the table, starting with Anela. How has the cohesion of your organization changed, or culture evolved as we've gone virtually and back? Have you felt any changes in how the overall message of the organization has changed, or any thoughts would be much appreciated.
I don't think that there was a change in the overall messaging or how we did things different. I think the one thing that we tried to stress to everyone is like, we're in a never normal situation, right? I mean, things change so fluidly these days. Like, who would have thought a couple of weeks ago that Singapore would go back to this situation, right? So it just, things are just so fluid and are moving so quickly that the messaging has to be that we've got to be agile, adaptable, flexible, able to, to pivot depending on where the situation is with COVID. And I think our teams have done that very effectively. I think they're used to now seeing change, and so are much more change able, I would say, than in the past. And so I think that's been a positive. But I think the other piece that I noticed is that, in the absence of having face-to-face interactions, you have to find a way to create other interactions that, that happened in the past that are not happening because of this situation. So, for example, I was very skeptical about team building online because I was like, this is just, I can't imagine how you do team building online. And so we tried it. Actually, it worked. You just had to adapt it to maybe 4 hours versus whole days, so you have to come up with new techniques to make it a little bit more engaging and fun and, put a lot of events within the event. And so I think you just have to be creative and use a lot of different tools to engage. And what I've found is that the employees themselves are very interested in participating. So you can actually enlist them to help think of different ideas to make the events or, interactions more productive and fun and lighthearted, so that they're not, not so heavy. I mean, it's very hard to sit 8 hours, for example, right? So trying to chunk it up in smaller pieces or do different things have been quite effective. But I think I've swung the other direction, saying, oh, no events, to we've got to do something, because I was like, how can you actually do some of these things virtually? But then I decided it's better than nothing, and you just have to find 100%. A way to make changes.
100%. And I think we all remember the initial Zoom drinks last year, which everybody did, which by the end of it were not as popular. And I think that there is a very interesting debate on getting team building and, the Friday evening pub onto Zoom, because that adds to your Zoom fatigue and doesn't take away from it. But it's a debate, and nonetheless not something we have clear feedback on. But before I move on to Phil, a quick question: has the cohesion, or are you getting any feedback that employees are feeling, the engagement is feeling lower than pre-COVID, or any such information?
So there's definitely a difference. I would say it's not all negative. So if you look at the data, it's mixed. There are positives and there's a balance of positives and negatives. And so overall, I think that's not a bad thing. So we have to find ways to improve the negatives and try to reinforce the positives. One of the things that I will say is our outcomes and results still don't show that there's an issue. So, but we have to keep at it to try and dig to make sure that we surface any kind of potential things that bubble up in the future. But our data doesn't actually play out to be one or the other. There are both sides. Some are positive and some are negative.
No, that makes a lot of sense, Anela. And as it's a change, it's not one way, right? It has both pros and cons and give backs and takeaways. So fun. Thanks for that, Anela. We'll quickly switch to Phil.
I feel I've spoken a lot about culture so far, so I'll try not to go too deep on it. But essentially, as we come back into kind of this hybrid workplace, partnering between real estate and HR to develop whatever the company's culture is, and replicate that into a physical environment and make it meaningful for somebody is going to be a big challenge. I think the connection between HR and real estate is going to get even stronger. Not that it isn't today, but it's going to get even stronger as we move forward with these spaces and really address how people are going to use it and interact. It also comes down to, I mean, the culture of any company. I mean, if you really believe it and you're really into the mojo of the people that you're working with, you'll work in a basement. You know, it's essentially, you know, how do you double down on the culture? How do you make it relevant to the people around you? And how do you then, you know, essentially create that feeling that you want to be a part of it, regardless of how it is or how it works out or where you are working from. And it's then a challenge for us to create the environment that's going to fit somewhere in between there.
That's awesome. And I'll take that sentence. If you're into the mojo, you'll work in the basement. That's a really cool way of putting it. Thanks, Phil.
It'll be a nice basement. Okay?
Nice basement with televisions and PlayStations. But before I move on to Arnold on this, a quick piece on mental well-being is we've seen this become a debate recently, of course. Mental well-being in, like I said, a back again, on again, off again kind of situations. Hi there. Has Netflix done anything specific to take care of mental well-being of their employees, or is that, again, a part of the culture anyway, and it's not a huge change, as you've mentioned? This is to Phil.
Oh, sorry, I was too busy watching, you know, school time. Sorry, repeat that question. you got to love a distraction.
I love it. We've got an additional panelist, but it's Phil. Has Netflix done anything specific on mental well-being as this pandemic has taken us back and forth between home working and then back to office and back to home? Or is that part of the culture anyway?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the culture anyway, but I think we've recognised, especially in the past, at least the past 6 months, that, you know, there are a lot of people that are still struggling with this. There are a lot of people that are you know, essentially working to do their best. The other kind of flip side is leaders and managers need to be able to recognise some of the signs, not only of what's happening in their own teams, but also for them personally, you know, recognise some of those signs that are saying that, you know, you're getting, you know, where you need to help or where you need to reach out. I think most organisations have these sort of services available, and just making people aware that they're available, and there's no real stigmatism to reaching out and having a conversation to somebody about it. Also, being able to instill a level of trust with your teams that they can approach you and have a conversation about it as well is very important.
Indeed. I've personally felt that with Knight Frank as well, that as things have gone back and forth, I've had no dearth of people asking me to reach out and saying, hey, in case you need something. So the culture itself is a big driver towards effort towards well-being. So that makes a lot of sense. Hopping on to Arnold. Arnold, how's the cohesion? How's the well-being part in GSK? What are your thoughts?
Right. Yeah, as a pharmaceutical companies, so we cares about the well-being of the employees, right? So same as other organizations, we do offer yoga class, like well-being talks, and it's just no difference. I remember that in the previous organizations, where at the starting of the circuit breaker, we actually have our frontline staff trying to call the individual staff, trying to check out things on them, and the employee of the financial organizations, they were very pleased about people checking things on them, on are you still mentally healthy and things like that. So I think that was a very good practices. Also, in terms of culture related to the workplace, we have this performance with choice. So it's programs that top down from the CEO, and so employees are encouraged to make the right choice to help them to be more productive. So that's actually also echo with our smart working guidelines that I mentioned that earlier.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense, Arnold. And I think overall we are seeing a nice part of culture and cohesion being, drivers for well-being. So over to our industry expert, Darren. Darren, how has IWG used its space to enhance culture for its enterprise and SME users across the world? Is there any specific effort that has taken place?
So I think with IWG, and our approach is obviously to be user-centric. As you can see from the panel today and the discussions and the polls, there's a varying mix of how people will engage with their employees, how they look to recruit, and how they bring talent into the business and look after that talent. So one of the things that we've been doing over the last 12 months plus is building our hub and spoke network, moving and acquiring more locations in community locations to add that ability of choice for the users and the employees. Because what we have to provide as the largest flex provider globally is a platform of choice of products to enable people to work in the way that they want to work. And allow organizations to be agile in the provision of the flex provision that they offer throughout their strategies. So, you know, what we're seeing is really a adoption of different solutions by different organizations to meet the demands of how they see a new hybrid way of working. And we do that as an organization through engagements with like memberships where customers can allow their employees to work from home for a few days, work from a location that IWG offers across any global city or regional town. But also, really importantly, providing the same user experience when they go into those spaces, leveraging off technology. And we've all been there, haven't we? We've gone to work from a cafe or from a place we've just sat down in, and you've got to log into a Wi-Fi connection. That's not a great environment for somebody to go and work in. But if they can leverage on technology and they can have a globalized platform where they connect in one time to IT, and they know that if they walk into another location, all of their IT is already synced to their business. It's safe, secure. And that's what the blend between the employee engagement, the employee expectation, and the company demand really is where IWG are trying to blend the two and provide the various solutions.
Makes sense, Darren. And I think it's, as we've all understood, that the flexible space or traditional space or community space offering is increasingly one that will have to measure up to what the branded workplace used to be. And of course, large leading organizations like IWG are already taking steps to make sure that enterprise occupiers are not, it's seamless or as close to seamless as possible. But one interesting point that jumped out to me as Sabina pulls up the final poll question is different cities and different cultures are reacting differently to hybrid, or if that's a word that's still not overused. 1 second, I'll just vote for this. I would think that the culture and cohesion of it is a different outcome in different cities. So for example, if you look at per capita, as Arnold mentioned around Thailand, per capita square foot in different cities in Asia is very different residentially. And that has an impact on your decision to go to office to be productive or not to be productive. Again, commute times have the same decision. So I think there is a really interesting part around people feeling like they're being cared for in this hybrid environment when you have the choice to make a decision. Say, listen, I'm in Mumbai. My commute time from point A to point B, which is my office, is 1 hour. I'd rather check into the nearest IWG center or spaces or Regis next to me. So I think there is that hybrid, but there is also a pretty interesting point to be made around how people care during the strategy for engagement. So we've asked that question now on what people feel around culture and cohesion. Sabina, are the results in? Oh, wow. 46% have said their culture has become less cohesive in the last year and a half as they worked remotely. And that is a clear indication that as we develop hybrid strategies, real estate has a big part to play in culture. And the more we care for it and more we think about it, the better it will be for culture and engagement. But pretty interesting results overall. Conscious of everyone's time, I just want to once again thank everyone for making time for us and sparking such an interesting debate with a mix of 3 awesome occupiers and great market intel and guidance from Darren. It's been a pretty cool session, and thanks audience for responding and spurring on the conversation. It was quite interactive. We once again want to thank our sponsors for this, and we will see you in the next one. Sabina, would you like to share your screen? Thanks. So again, our sponsors are Prudential for this, and also watch out for our upcoming similar conversations with great panelists and varied views, and again, interactive around the virtual speed networking or celebrating diversity and future cities, as you can see on our screen. Thank you all for your participation, and see you in the next one.
Just bear with me while people leave the webinar.
Sure.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Samarth. That was great moderating and awesome time management as well. So we can not have to use any of your extra time to do this next section. So Samarth, if you have your prompts ready, this is for the social media push. So what we're going to do is Samarth is going to just mention we've had a great wrap-up session, and then the title, and give some thoughts, and then he'll turn to each of you to give some of your thoughts on that. And then at the end, he's going to say, watch this space for the upcoming video. We hope you enjoy this session. So if you're good to go with that, I'll just hide myself and mute myself, and then I'll come back on for a quick thank you, and then I let you get back to your day. So just give me 2 seconds and then start when you're ready, Samarth.
Thank you all for your time and such a wonderful session. As such, I've learned a lot on this session and have some really nice takeaways. I think this is really interesting as a mix of discussion and panelists on various stages of flexibility, various decisions. What we've seen different in this particular panel is that many of the occupiers that are in this panel are at different points in evolution, different points in adopting flexibility, different views on what the workplace means. And I think it's really interesting to balance that with the guidance that Darren's given us from a flexible space perspective. So really interested to see what the future of the workplace is. And I'll now pass on to Phil for a crystal gazing, which is one quick takeaway. And what do you think where will this land? It could be aspirational, it could be crystal ball gazing, as you would like.
Look, it was a fantastic discussion with a great distraction in the middle. And essentially, you know, it'll be, it'll be a fun watch for anybody, I'm sure. Crystal gazing, I think essentially the relationship in our workplaces between HR and our workplace executives and real estate is going to be a very stronger bond. And essentially seeing companies essentially looking to double down on their culture and really understand what it is that drives and motivates people to basically either work for them and or return to these environments. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, muted. Thanks, Phil. Over to Arnald.
Right. Thank you, Samarth. I think that was a very informative session. I've also learned a lot from the industry peers, HR expert, and also what's the trends on the flexible space market will look like. About the future, I really would be interested to see how do we materialize workplace as a service in a corporate environment.
That's a very good point, Arnald. Awesome. Over to Darren.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a great session with everyone here today and some great conversations. I think from my perspective in the industry, we know the pandemic has certainly made some drastic changes, and you know, I expect those to be lasting and effective changes as we look at more people-centric organizations, where that drives the strategy and delivery of every organization into a hybrid model of working, which I feel personally will be different for every organization as well. And that's very key for me.
Indeed, Darren, and thank you for your guidance. Over to Anela.
Hi. Sorry, for me, I think first a great discussion, but I feel that we're still in the very forefront of this future of work. I think we're just at the beginning phase, and we still are going to have to see various iterations of what it will look like for the future. But clearly, we're going to have to be regardless of which organization, clearly we have 3 different models that we talked about today.
Yep.
And regardless of what happens, we know it will be more flexible, more agile, more digital, more purposeful. But one thing that was called out by all of us was the culture. It has to fit our culture. It has to fit the organization, and it has to really ensure that it embodies the organization values, and for us, our leadership principles. So at the end of the day, we're going to have to continue to iterate and test and see what works. And it's probably going to change every time a new situation arises. So we just have to all be flexible. That change is just the never normal situation these days.
Indeed, Nella. And I think this is a really good summary of it. So thank you once again, all. And thanks for making time at the top of your day.
Thank you.
Sabina, over to you.
That was great. Thank you so much, guys. So listen, a big, big thank you on behalf of the Chamber for taking part and giving us so much of your time. We really appreciate it. I will let you all know once the link goes live, and we will be tagging you all in our social media outputs. So please do share, like, and comment to help drive it amongst your networks. And just a big thank you on behalf of myself and Knight Frank as well for taking part. So thanks so much and enjoy your day. And I give you 4 minutes back to your day.
Thank you.
So,
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Dave.
Nice meeting you all.
Nice to meet you.
Bye, Phil. Bye, Nella. Bye, Dan.
Bye.